My parents walked out when I was 13 years later. They returned for my uncle's wealth. They thought they could outsmart his will, but one hidden clause ended their greed. Forever people often picture abandonment as something loud. A fight, tears, a slammed door. For me, it was quiet. Just another cold Tuesday morning when I woke up to an empty apartment and a handwritten note on the counter. Up until then, I thought my life was normal. I was Noah, 13, the only kid in a small apartment with parents who pretended to function like a family. Dad ran a small used car lot down the street, one of those places with a plastic tube man flapping in the wind like it's trying to escape. He acted like some business hotshot, but half the time he was either gambling or losing money somewhere he shouldn't have been. Mom ran a daycare from home. She managed for a while until her depression hit harder and the parents stopped bringing their kids. When you cancel on families 3 times in a row, people stop trusting you. Still, at first, we were a family. Friday movie nights with microwave popcorn, camping trips in a tent that leaked when it rained, cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. Nothing perfect, but it was ours. Then the cracks began to show. Late-night fights. Dad coming home reeking of smoke and beer instead of motor oil. Mom sleeping for days with the blinds closed. Groceries vanished faster than they were replaced. When I asked about dinner, she'd mumble something like, "Just eat cereal." Dad always promised to bring more food or money. Promises were cheap, and he spent them like pennies. I thought if I behaved perfectly, kept my grades up clean, didn't complain, they'd fix things. But children don't fix broken adults. That Tuesday morning, I overslept. Nobody woke me for school. The apartment was still. Too still. Their bedroom door, usually shut, stood wide open. Inside, half the closet was empty. Drawers half pulled, socks and old receipts scattered like they'd left in a rush. And on the counter, "Noah, we can't do this anymore. Your Uncle Graham will take care of you. We're sorry." 16 words. That's all it took to end a childhood. Mom's phone went straight to voicemail. Dad's number had already been disconnected. No forwarding address, no emergency contacts, nothing. That night I sat on the couch, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It never did. The next day, the landlord banged on the door demanding rent. I told him my parents were gone. He just frowned like he'd heard that excuse before and muttered something about calling social services. That's when the panic hit. By day 3, I gave up and called my school counselor. She didn't hesitate. Within hours, Child Protective Services showed up. The man who came, Mr. Barrett, had that calm, practiced tone people use when they know you're about to shatter. He flipped through files, made calls, then said they'd found my father's brother, Uncle Graham. I'd only met him twice. My parents always called him pretentious or cold, said he thought he was better than everyone. He owned a luxury home design business, never married, lived in another state. Still, he was the only one who answered the phone. The next morning, he arrived, black car, tailored suit, polished shoes, the kind of man who looked allergic to dust. He took one look around our apartment and said, "Pack what fits in one suitcase. The rest can be shipped later." No hugs, no small talk, just efficiency. That was how my childhood ended, quiet, abrupt, and with a stranger who somehow became the only adult who stayed. While the social worker handled paperwork, Graham stood in the living room as if inspecting a property he might buy. No sadness, no outrage, just calm precision. "One suitcase," he repeated. "We're not bringing clutter." I looked at my wall of photos, old video games, and clothes, feeling a mix of anger and fear. But something in his voice told me arguing wasn't an option. I shoved clothes, a few books, and one photo of me and Mom into a faded blue suitcase. On the drive to his house, he barely spoke, only checking occasionally if I needed food or the bathroom. No comforting words, no fake cheer. It felt like boot camp. His house turned out to be a Victorian mansion straight out of an architecture magazine, iron gates, carved stone, hedges trimmed to military precision. I stepped out of the car in my worn hoodie feeling like a smudge on a painting. "Breakfast is at 7. Don't touch the curtains with dirty hands," he said before walking away. That night, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering if he'd call CPS to take me back if I messed up. His rules came fast. Shoes off inside, homework at the desk, 1 hour of piano daily. I broke most of them within a month, not from defiance, just inexperience. If I woke up late, breakfast was gone. "Kitchen closes at 7:30, he'd say without looking up from his newspaper. No yelling, no emotional manipulation, just consequences. It was strange. He wasn't cruel, just firm, like running a company. If I failed a test, I lost TV privileges. If I did better next time, those privileges returned. Every punishment ended cleanly, no grudges. That was new to me. 2 weeks in, I finally saw a crack in his armor. I was sitting on my bed, crying quietly over an old wedding photo of my parents when he walked in. He didn't speak. He just handed me a handkerchief and sat beside me until I stopped shaking. No advice, no pity, just presence. Somehow that meant more than any apology. His life ran like a machine. Whitaker Home Collections, his company, wasn't just furniture. It was an empire. He managed stores across 3 states with military precision. He handled me the same way, structured, efficient, borderline intimidating. Weekends meant tagging along to meetings. "Watch who talks first," he'd whisper, "and who stays quiet longest. Silence can corner people." I was 14 and learning business psychology before I even mastered algebra. He was relentless, once made me rewrite an essay 3 times for using cool instead of effective. "Be careful, Noah," he'd say. "The world doesn't bend because you're irritated." And yet, he never left. Every time I broke a rule or pushed back, he disciplined me, but he stayed. That permanence mattered more than any affection he couldn't express. By my 2nd year living with him, I realized I wasn't just being raised, I was being trained. He transferred me from public school to Westfield Academy, uniforms, Latin classes, and kids whose families took ski trips to Switzerland. I barely kept up. When I came home one night exhausted and ready to cry over geometry, he set down his fork and said, "Your situation changed without your choice. Your response, however, is entirely yours. Use the opportunity or waste it. I don't invest in lost causes." It stung, but it lit something in me. I found a tutor, formed study groups, worked until my hands cramped. By junior year, I made the honor roll. He never said, "I'm proud." He just left a new leather briefcase on my bed with a note, "You'll need this." That was his version of pride. Everything had purpose. Every rule, every punishment, every schedule, all meant to shape me into someone competent. When college applications came, I told him I'd go to a state university with my friends. He walked in one night, dropped brochures for Ivy Leagues, and said, "Apply to these." I snapped. "Why do you care where I go? It's my life, not your project." He didn't flinch. "Your friends are thinking short-term, I'm thinking legacy. You have potential, don't waste it hiding in comfort." I exploded. "I never asked to be your project. Maybe I just want normal for once." His response was cold but precise. "And I never asked to raise you, yet here we are. I'm offering you chances your parents couldn't even dream of." "You're welcome." That hurt, not because he was cruel, but because he was right. We hadn't chosen each other, but we were what we had. That night, for the first time, he opened up. He told me my dad had been brilliant, a math prodigy who never went to college because they couldn't afford it. Graham had gotten the scholarship instead. My father never forgave him. "Your mother was gifted too," he said quietly. "But life closed in on her. I won't let that happen to you." For the first time, I understood his obsession with discipline. He wasn't just building me up, he was breaking a family curse. I applied to 7 schools just to prove I could. Got accepted to 5. I chose Northwestern, far enough to be independent, close enough that he couldn't accuse me of running away. When the acceptance letter arrived, he simply handed me a pen. "Sign it. Tuition's handled." No hugs, just action. And even though I rolled my eyes, I knew he was proud. College life was easier than living with him. I already knew how to wake up early, manage deadlines, and read people. While others partied, I strategized. I joined clubs, led projects, and discovered a love for design and marketing, probably inherited from him. All those years of observe everything lectures paid off. Our phone calls turned casual. He even developed a sense of humor. When I complained about cafeteria food, he said, "Good training." In business, everything tastes bland when you're doing things right. Every summer, I worked at his company. He rotated me between departments, inventory, supply chains, marketing, as if testing whether I'd sink or swim. By the time I graduated, I knew the business inside out. When I moved back into his house, I wasn't the scared boy who'd arrived with one suitcase. I was the company's new marketing director. We became 2 men sharing space, distant but steady. Dinner some nights, quiet nods on others, orderly, predictable. Over 6 years, I climbed ranks, assistant, then head of marketing. I helped launch new store formats, modernize the online platform, and triple profits. By 27, I had everything I once thought I'd never have. A home, a purpose, and the strange affection of a man who had taught me everything without ever saying he cared. Then everything changed. One night, Graham called me into his study. The man who usually filled every silence with direction or dry sarcasm suddenly looked quiet, too quiet. He gestured for me to sit, eyes fixed on the glass of whiskey in his hand. "Leukemia," he said simply. No soft introduction, no emotional preamble, just that single word. "It's advanced," he added, like he was giving a quarterly report. "Treatment will buy time, not a cure." The words hit harder than anything I'd ever heard, but Graham wasn't looking for sympathy. He laid out his illness the same way he handled business, factual, methodical, stripped of all emotion. "We all die," he said. "The only difference is when and what we do with what's left." After that conversation, our dynamic quietly flipped. I became the one setting his schedule, making sure he took his medication, reminding him to eat, to rest, to show up for chemo. He'd roll his eyes whenever I insisted, muttering about bossy gaze, but he never fought back. Deep down, he knew I was running things the only way he'd ever taught me, efficiently and without excuses. At work, he began transferring control little by little. First, smaller accounts, then full departments. Then one day, entire company decisions. He didn't hover, didn't micromanage. If I made a bad call, he'd raise an eyebrow and say, "Fix it," before turning away. And somehow that was enough. The staff stopped seeing me as the kid who showed up out of nowhere. Once Graham made it clear that I wasn't temporary, they started coming to me first. He had made his choice known without ever saying it aloud. Even as the disease thinned him out, he still carried himself with that dry sharpness. On days when the pain was bad, he'd toss out snide one-liners just to remind everyone he was still in control. But sometimes, just sometimes, the armor cracked. One night after I helped him into bed, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength and muttered, "You were the son I never let myself have." That was Graham, direct enough to shatter you, too proud to repeat it. I didn't answer, I just nodded because any words would have sounded hollow compared to that. 8 months later, he was gone, peacefully. The funeral was modest, a few executives, distant relatives, and loyal employees. No flowery speeches, just quiet respect. I stood there, realizing that the man everyone once called cold and heartless was the only one who had ever truly shown up for me. The mansion felt cavernous afterward. I caught myself pausing mid-conversation to tell him something, only to remember he'd never answer again. His absence echoed louder than his voice ever did. But grief didn't mean stopping. If Graham had drilled anything into me, it was that action mattered more than mourning. So I poured myself into the company, running it with the same ruthless precision he had built into me. No shortcuts, no laziness, no half measures. For 3 weeks it was all business. Meetings, paperwork, silence, until the letter came. Caldwell, Graham's lawyer, wanted to schedule the will reading. I assumed it would be a quiet formality. Just me, maybe a couple of board members, and whatever charities Graham supported. I couldn't have guessed who else would walk through those doors. The following Friday, I walked into the firm's marble lobby, nodded to the receptionist, and froze. Standing there, chatting awkwardly by the elevator, were 2 ghosts from my childhood, my parents. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. They weren't invited. They weren't supposed to be there. But somehow, they'd found a way in, like a bad debt resurfacing when you finally reach stability. Caldwell noticed the commotion in the foyer, and ever the professional, sighed and allowed them to sit, likely just to document their lack of standing. My mother looked like she was dressed for a discount board meeting, knockoff blazer, imitation pearls, fake confidence. My father's too-tight navy suit screamed desperation, his jaw clenched like he was negotiating a deal. Their eyes locked on me. "Noah," my mother breathed. "Oh, sweetheart, look at you." Dad gave a stiff nod. "You've grown." "Yeah," I said flatly. "Tends to happen when you feed a kid instead of abandoning him with a note." The secretary's forced smile vanished as she led us to the conference room. Inside, everything was meticulous, polished wood table, neat stacks of papers, and Caldwell at the head, adjusting his glasses like a man preparing for impact. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We're here to review the last will and testament of Mr. Graham Whitaker." My mother immediately raised her hand like we were in a classroom. "Before we start, we're Noah's parents. Graham may have stepped in for a while, but we're his family. Surely we have some rights here," I smirked. "Interesting, you remember that word family now?" Caldwell ignored me and opened the folder. "Per Mr. Whitaker's instructions," he read. "The following assets are bequeathed to his legal heir, Noah Grant Whitaker. Primary residence valued at $1.8 million. Cash holdings totaling approximately $2 million. 70% ownership of Whitaker Home Collections, estimated value $45 million. The air went still. My parents froze like statues. That's everything," Mom stammered. "Correct," Caldwell said calmly. "The estate passes fully to Noah." Dad lurched forward, voice trembling with fury. This is ridiculous. He manipulated the boy. We should be co-managers at least. He's too young for all this. I laughed quietly. Guidance. You couldn't even guide yourselves to keep the lights on. Caldwell lifted a hand. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, I understand this is emotional, but the will is airtight. You can contest it, but I assure you, you'll lose. Mom leaned forward, tears starting to pool. We're not contesting anything. We just want to help. Noah, you shouldn't have to handle this alone. Let us oversee things until you're settled. I stared at her. You left me at 13. I'll manage, Dad hissed, ungrateful brat. Caldwell snapped his folder shut. That concludes today's meeting. Further proceedings will be finalized later this week. Outside, they followed me like shadows. Noah, please, Mom pleaded. Just dinner, okay? One dinner for old time's sake. Normally, I would have told them to stay gone, but something in me, maybe morbid curiosity, agreed. Fine, one dinner. Tonight, we met at a cozy Italian place near my house. They were already seated, pretending to browse menus. Mom went first. We made mistakes, honey. Your father had problems back then, gambling, and I was depressed. We weren't ourselves. I stirred my drink. Yeah, must have been tough abandoning a kid while you figured that out. They exchanged tight smiles, trying to hold the performance together. Then Dad cut in, voice low and transactional. We need help, Noah. Finances are rough. Your mother's medical bills are piling up. Just $100,000 to get us back on track. I laughed so hard half the restaurant turned. Straight to 6 figures, huh? No warm-up, Dad's face flushed. You've got millions now, don't act like it's hard. Correction, I said, leaning back. I have millions, you have unpaid pasta. Mom's voice turned brittle. We're your parents. We deserve some consideration. Yeah, I said quietly. You deserved it 15 years ago. Dinner ended fast after that. They made one last plea. I told them to get jobs. Dad muttered something about ungrateful children ruining family legacies. I left the restaurant smiling. Not out of cruelty, but closure. Seeing their greed so nakedly confirmed that nothing had changed. A week later, I was back in Caldwell's office. This time, my parents brought backup, a nervous lawyer who looked like he charged by the hour but billed by the mistake. Dad strutted in, chest puffed. We're here to clear up this little misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I asked. You mean the part where Graham raised me while you didn't? Mom gave a fake laugh. Noah, sweetheart, we're not here to fight. We just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed. A business that size, it's a lot for someone your age. You're right, I said evenly. Which is why Graham spent a decade training me for it. While you were off pretending I didn't exist. Caldwell cleared his throat. Before we proceed, a few clarifications. He opened a binder and spread out the pages. First, Noah wasn't just Mr. Whitaker's ward. He was legally adopted at 16. Here's the documentation signed and court certified. My parents' lawyer froze mid-note. Mom went pale. That's impossible. Not impossible, Caldwell said smoothly. Just legal. Which means, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, you have no standing in this estate. Dad slammed a hand on the table. We're his biological parents, I smirked. Congratulations. That makes you donors, not guardians. Caldwell kept going, unbothered. Second, Mr. Whitaker anticipated this. He hired investigators. We have detailed records of multiple attempts you made to extort money from him. Calls, emails, bank traces. It's all here. Their lawyer visibly shrank in his seat. Third, Caldwell said, pulling out one final envelope, Mr. Whitaker left a personal letter. He unfolded it and read aloud. Noah, if they've shown up, I told you they would. They haven't changed. Don't let them steal what you earned. Remember, family isn't who gives you life, it's who stands beside you when life falls apart. Silence. Then Caldwell delivered the finishing blow. And lastly, the protection clause. Should anyone attempt to contest this will, all assets will automatically transfer to the Children's Cancer Foundation. Permanently. He looked up. Only individuals with legal standing can trigger it, and you, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, do not qualify. I couldn't help it, I laughed. So go ahead, sue me, all you'll win is a charity fundraiser. Mom slammed her hand on the table. This is theft. You can't just steal our son and our inheritance. Funny, I said, leaning forward, because last time I checked, you already gave both away. Dad's face twisted. You'll regret this. No, I said calmly. But you'll regret ever thinking I'd still need you. Caldwell gestured toward the door. That will be all. Security. 2 guards stepped in. My parents shouted, cursed, demanded someone higher up. But Caldwell had already closed his binder. Meeting adjourned. Watching them being escorted through that glass lobby, red-faced, screaming about loyalty and bloodlines, was a kind of peace I didn't know existed. To everyone else, they looked like lunatics. To me, they looked exactly as they always had, desperate, loud, and powerless. I didn't wait for their next stunt. By nightfall, I had a restraining order filed and served. But predictably, they didn't last even 2 days before testing it. The security camera caught their rental car creeping up my driveway after dark, headlights off, moving like they were starring in a bad crime show. Mom wore church clothes. Dad strutted beside her, pretending confidence made him invisible. They rang the bell, over and over. When I finally cracked the door, I said flatly, "Restraining orders still active." "You can't be here." Mom smiled, that sugary fake smile she used whenever she wanted something. "We just need 5 minutes." "Perfect," I said. "Take them outside the gate." They ignored me and pushed their way in. Dad scanned the foyer, eyes gleaming with greed. Mom ran her hand along the staircase like she already owned it. "This house," she said softly, "it was meant for family." "It is," I said. "Just not the kind that abandons their kid and comes back 20 years later for a payday." Her smile faltered. Dad's jaw tightened. "Drop the attitude," he snapped. "Without us, you'd still be nothing." I stepped closer, meeting his stare. "Without you," I said, "I became everything you couldn't." And for once, they had no comeback. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a comment, hit subscribe, follow for more, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one.